The following program and contents, including the views and opinions expressed by the host and any guest speakers, are solely for informational and entertainment purposes. The views and opinions expressed are not endorsed or supported by REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, or advertisers. The host and guest speakers are solely responsible for their own perspectives, and their views do not reflect those of REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, or advertisers. The information provided in this program should not be considered as professional advice or as a substitute for professional consultation. Listeners and viewers are encouraged to form their own opinions and seek independent advice when necessary. REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, their employees, affiliates, and advertisers hereby disclaim any liability for any claims, damages, or losses incurred as a result of the information presented in this program.
Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Mission Evolution is coming to you on the X-Zone Broadcast Network and X-Zone TV on Simul TV Channel 32 from our broadcast studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. This hour, we'll explore the latest on the fear that binds you. Fear is very insidious. It's daunting to consider how many of our choices and decisions are based on underlying fears rather than facts. Why have we become so fear-based? What impact is fear having on our lives? Does fear even have a purpose? With us this hour to delve into the topic of fear is R. James Case. His website, rjamescase.com. Jim, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Hi there. Great to be here, Gwilda. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little about yourself.
Well, goodness, it's been quite the adventure. I usually like to start around the time when I was a teenager at 16, simply because that was a critical turning point for my life. I had discovered early that I was a gay man as a young person, and I came out in high school. And at 15 and a half, 16 years old, I had been going out at night, leaving my parents' home and sneaking out. And so I came back one morning. At 1 o'clock in the morning, and the screen doors were locked and the house was closed, and I had to make a decision. At that point, the decision was go back into this situation, which was not going to be very fun, or get out and begin to explore the experiences of my life. And that's what I chose. I literally walked away in the middle of the night, had to walk 5 miles to, I know it sounds like we walked through the snow to go to school, but literally I walked 5 miles to go to the nearest town, because where we lived was a street in the middle of nowhere. That began a very powerful journey for me that took me on many different adventures. In particular, I've had to confront a lot of major stuff that has happened over the course of our lives. I was diagnosed with AIDS in the 80s. I've done extremely well. I was working actually at a residential facility for natural healing in Arizona a little bit after that, actually. That process began to open me up in ways that I'd never actually ever anticipated, because that was a physical and mental, emotional, and spiritual journey that was to unfold all of the old belief systems and ideas and structures that I carried in my life. And that evolved. I actually got married to a woman. I was married for 24 years. It was a choice in my life at that point, because there was so much connection, but also that I realized that by the time I was 20 years old, that if I didn't change the direction of my life, I probably wouldn't be alive by the time I was 30, because it was going that far out of control. So I worked with my now deceased wife, but worked with Mona for 24 years. She was an amazing teacher, amazing amazing partner. We ran a residential facility where we worked with people that had anything from lupus to AIDS to Epstein-Barr to all the major diseases. They come and stay with us for 6 weeks to 3 months, and we would work with them through the process, many of whom are still alive today through that process. And that led me to another part of the adventure. There was that in 2009, there was a lot that occurred, obviously, over the years, but the banner things in 2009, it became clear that I was no longer being really true to myself. I came out when I was in high school. I never got to experience that in a healthy way. I was very out of balance with it, which was what led to all of the excitement that I had dealt with. And then in 2009, I had one of those country music years. I was diagnosed with cancer. My marriage ended. I lost my house. I lost my job. And I was re-diagnosed with AIDS in September of that year. Due to the fact that I had chemo and radiation, it decimated my immune system so badly that occurred. I then, in the process of that, met my now husband, who I've been married to for 15 years. And unfortunately, over the course of that experience, he and I, in our interaction, me not realizing that there was more to the story. I didn't realize that I was as ill as I was. He ended up what they call seroconverting right in front of me, meaning he got the disease from me active. And we walked through that. Again, I was going through cancer in 2009, decided to end the relationship because I was no longer being in alignment with who I am at all. I had so drifted apart because I wanted this to work, but it was no longer really serving my life. Of course, I went back to work after the chemo and radiation, and I got fired the day I got back.
My next question, Jim, was going to be, so how'd you get interested in fear?
Yeah, so I've confronted a few little things along the way that sort of struck me, but it's all been marvelously structured because for me, this whole life experience, and really, truly, the reason I use that seminal moment as a young person is because it set the tone for me going forward, which was, I'm here to experience. I'm here to experience whatever and as much as I can of what this amazing place, this earth place has to offer. And so my life has been driven by that. And as a result, I had to find out what the fear business was in my life, because otherwise I couldn't take steps. Otherwise I wouldn't lean into new things, I'd be more about being afraid. You'll notice I'm wearing a catheter. In a year and a half ago, I got COVID and was put into the hospital for 15 days. And this is the gift that came out with that. And it's not a breathing problem, it's an absorption problem. So I clarify that because I'm not going to fall over because I can't breathe. So it became an absorption problem. But this is, again, another space where the opportunity to say, am I going to respond in fear, or am I going to respond to what is happening in my world, and how do I deal with it from here? So the foundation of all of this has just been realizing that as I've stepped into every adventure in this experience, that I had to literally observe my life, to take a step back to say, what am I choosing in this moment? What am I choosing in this moment? What am I choosing in this moment? I still, currently with this whole process, I walk 2 miles a day. I'm still engaged fully in my life, and it sort of drives my oxygen suppliers crazy because I break carts and
that sort of thing. Well, Jim, I know that most of us don't really appreciate feeling fear, but doesn't fear have a purpose?
I believe in my experience, fear to me designates and shows where alignment is off. And when I say alignment, I mean we are as a being, I believe, an expression of source, God, however you want to call it. We are that expression here. We are creation realized. We are that spark of the divine that shows up here, that gets to experience through this perspective what this whole world thing is about. And so for me, I lost track of myself. Darn it.
That's okay. I was asking you the purpose of fear, because it's, we have all sorts of emotions, and except for guilt, most of them have a real purpose in our lives. What is the purpose?
I think they all have a purpose. I think, again, where I was going with that was that the alignment piece means here I am when I am in that space, when I'm in that zone of who my most authentic expression is. The emotions give us the chance to see where we are in and out of that alignment. So the more joy we experience, the more positive expression that we experience, that to me means that we're more aligned to the greatest part of ourselves. When we're in negative emotion, when we're in fear, when we're in all those expressions, those are saying, hey, your perspective and your larger perspective aren't in agreement right now. And there are levels of resistance that go into that create even more tension in that experience.
So, Jim, how does that line up with? I live up here in the wilderness, and if I go out on my front area there,
Mhm.
and suddenly I'm round a tree and bump into a cougar, the
Yes.
hair is going to rise in the back of my neck. I'm going to feel fear. Does that mean I'm out of alignment? You see, fear
There,
is a real basic thing that started a long time before we had all these morals and stuff.
right.
So,
And I think, go ahead. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
so how does that align with what you're telling us?
Okay. So I see fear differently than the survival instinct. So there is the thing within us that triggers that survival instinct. And in my experience, the survival instinct actually can trigger more of a hyper experience, meaning we become more of who we are and that our senses become heightened, our awareness becomes riveted. We can pull fear into that experience, or we can observe that, yes, this is happening, but I need to respond to this experience. Fear is a reaction. Response is different. When you're in that place of being threatened, there is a moment in there where you can give to the fear, which then reclouds your experience, or you can observe that there's fear and step into the enhancement of the survival experience in order to take the steps you need to navigate your way to survival. And then the after effect of that can, of course, obviously be you collapse and you fall, your heart's racing, you're crazy, you're like, oh my goodness, what just happened?
What
Um,
just happened, and I don't want to repeat it.
and I don't
Well,
want to repeat it. Exactly.
we're going to have to take a break for station identification.
Good.
Jim and I will return shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What are you afraid of? With
Ah,
us this hour discussing devastating effects of fear is R. James Case. His website, rjamescase.com. Jim, we were talking about the kind of fear one feels when they're suddenly in clear and present danger.
mhm.
But you said that's a different survival fear is different than some of the other fears. When we're any of the fear, isn't it based on survival really though? Whether we're perceiving that our life is going to be over emotionally, even if we don't comply or whatever else, or we're going to lose things and then our life will be over. Is it all survival based?
Well, I think that the difference is, and this is the piece that I think is the biggest struggle, is that the attachment to whatever it is we're reacting to. So fear to me is, and what I have learned in my own experience is that fear is learned. Fear is not inherent, meaning we don't come in afraid. We don't come into this world being afraid. We learn fear based on the experiences that we have from the womb all the way to coming into being a physical being. We
I have to
react
I
and
have to I have to back you up a little bit here.
sure.
Infants come in with the instantaneous fight or flight of a
Mhm.
loud noise or this or that. So I would have to argue that no, we come in with fear.
Again, I don't see that as they have no relationship. An infant has no context, so their responses are very organic, and we may assume that they're fear, but they could be nothing more than discomfort. They could be anger. It could be any number of feelings that go into that. But all of it is a feeling spectrum. It is an emotional spectrum. We learn over the course of our experience. I think that starting with, you talk about the kid coming out in the womb, the child is inundated with the mother's and the parents and the environment's experience. So if the mother happens to be a very fearful person, that fear is translated. We're energetic beings, we experience that, we live in that environment. When we come into this world, then there is already an inclination in the system. How we respond over time, and even as a kid, even if in the end it is a fear response, that child has no way to deal with that response other than to experience it. And that's the beauty of watching children, is that they experience it, they go through it, and they come out of it. And if there is nothing there to impact, to cause trauma, then it becomes a nothing event, right? There's a story, a quick story I like to share about how the impact happens. A little kid is playing with a red ball in the front yard. A little child, 2, 3 years old, playing with a red ball in his front yard, having a wonderful time, so much joy, throwing, rolling, playing with the ball. The ball bounces and rolls into the road, and the child runs to grab the ball and gets hit by a car. From that point forward, the child's mind will begin to associate the color red with danger, will begin to associate balls with negative attributes, will look to even possibly thinking that the idea of having fun with with a red ball is also a danger zone. So as little people, we begin to put together incorrectly, we begin to piece together these moments in our experience that then 10 years from now, I'm now a teenager and I'm playing ball I'm playing a game or whatever, and a red ball comes into my world, and suddenly I'm having a reaction to this red ball, or I suddenly don't want to play anymore, or my system shuts down because red ball means danger. Whatever it is, the belief system that was built in my little mind at that point then becomes the belief system that I carry until I come to a point that I can stop and say, whoa, what is that? That's an unconscious response. I want that to come above the conscious threshold. I want to understand, why am I having that response? And then go, oh, red ball, I remember that. I remember that situation. I don't have to have that response anymore. And now we can deprogram that belief system because we stop thinking about it, we stop encouraging it, and we stop responding to it.
So we aren't talking about the emotions. We're talking about the then conditioned response that we build up around the emotions. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, that's a natural process when we have no way to, all we have is what we go with in our mind, or our lack of experience in the world.
Well, we have to build it around something, yes? So
Sure.
conditioned response is there to protect us to not make the same mistake twice, although it certainly can be a double-edged sword.
It can be. Again, it serves for a while, but then when it becomes an obstacle, when it becomes a thing that pulls you out of your ability to be present in the moment, to engage with your life as it's showing itself to you, that no longer, in my mind, is now being driven by fear. Because that belief system is sitting back here tickling everything I do, and it says, oh, no, don't go there. Oh, be careful. Oh, you might not, whatever the breath thing is, whatever that moment is, it's all stimulated by that memory.
So we're not, again, the fear isn't the problem. It's the conditioned response and defense mechanisms built up around it, is what it sounds like to me. Is that where we're going with this?
Well, I think it's a combination, because it isn't stagnant in the sense that it doesn't stay the same in every segment of your experience. As you become more adept at navigating the world, as you become more conscious and aware of your environment, as you're able to think complexly, is that a word? As you're able to think with more complexity, it begins to evolve and change. And that's where I see that fear becomes more of a tool, because don't forget, not only is that individual experience happening, but then there's also all of the messages we receive from authority figures, from the news, from the world at large, from our schools, from wherever. The message of fear: be afraid, be afraid, be afraid. Don't do this. Be afraid of people. Be careful. This person can hurt you. Be careful. This bit, whatever it all is, you begin. Then there's the integration and the entrainment into fear, which I think is another thing. And I think we're talking on similar tracks, but it's not a closed environment. It's not a one strand deal.
So our emotions, can they serve as a guidance system rather than just a knee-jerk reaction? And if so, how do we get to that point?
Absolutely. And that's what I honestly believe is the true nature of emotions. It is to say that it's showing me the guideposts of where I am. If I've made a choice in my life, and I use this, I use a technique, energy up, energy down. And what that means for me is that anything that I'm going to step into in my life, I lean into it. And if it causes my energy to spin up, if I get engaged, if I'm wanting to participate, then I'm all in. If that thing causes me to pause, if it causes my energy to drop, then I stop. I stop and I step back, because that's telling me that that emotion, whatever that emotion is, whether it's in the moment I feel depressed, or I feel sad, or I feel confused, or I feel unsure, or I feel unworthy, all of those things are trying to inform me about what I'm leaning into. It does not mean that the thing I'm leaning into is bad or wrong. It means I am responding to it in a way that I'm not going to align successfully in order to achieve what it is I want to achieve. So stepping back for me is to say, let's take a moment and assess. I don't have enough information. I need more information. So I'm going to get that information, and then I'm going to lean in again and see where it takes me.
So as part of the information gathering have to do with, where is this response to this emotion coming from?
Sure, can be. Sometimes the story doesn't matter. See, the thing that's interesting to me about the mind is that the mind will make up anything in support of whatever your predominant energy is. So if you are in fear, the mind is supplying from your warehouse in the back there, the subconscious is supplying you with information of all these experiences that match the vibration you're currently confronting. The trick is that that's the identification process. Now you have to spin yourself out of that vibration in order to achieve a new perspective, in order to put yourself in a new place, a new vantage point of viewing this, so that you're no longer immersed in it, but you are the observer of it.
So it sounds to me like your fear will throw you into the back brain, and the only thing you have in the back brain is fight, flight. There's no spirituality. There's no reasoning. There's no intelligence really. It's very primal. So it sounds like you get thrown into that place, but you're talking about then regathering yourself into the front brain enough to evaluate what's going on.
Yeah, and that's what I call getting into the observer state. So I think there is a distinction that I make here that may be a little different, and that is I do not associate the fight or flight mechanism with fear. I don't associate them in the same way, meaning they can trigger. The fear can be big enough that it can trigger a fight or flight response. It can retrigger, and many people go there because the button is so sensitive that it immediately triggers fight or flight. It immediately triggers survival. That to me is the inundation process that has occurred in just living in the world at large. Once you become conscious of that process, it is my experience that then you have the ability, there is a space between something occurring and your response to it. There's a gap. Can be little. Sometimes it can be really super tiny, but there's always a gap because you have in the moment the ability to make a choice. You have in the moment the ability, and sometimes it's horribly uncomfortable. Sometimes you're like the thing confronts you and your system is in its auto response. It's in that and you have to stop and breathe into it and find your center and then step into a different way. Now, for me, I use breath. Breath has been a powerful tool for shifting state because what I can stop and do that immediately, and it will immediately change the state of my energy. Because as soon as I begin to pull in more life force and I begin to focus on that change, I can then spiral myself into a different perspective once again. It doesn't mean that the fear has gone away completely, and it doesn't mean that it changes immediately. It doesn't change what I'm experiencing. It changes my perspective and how I respond to. So I've jumped into that gap between stimulus and response. And I've said, okay, I want to expand this so I can give myself room to look at this. So I can give myself room to process this.
Room to act instead of react. Is that
exactly? Yes. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Perfect.
Okay. I understand. So we are just about out of time in this segment. But on the other side, I'd like to go a little deeper into the different kinds of fear and how we can transmute it to our own purposes.
Sounds great.
All right. Jim and I will be right back to continue this discussion. So you stay right there. This is Mission Evolution www.missionevolution.org. Can love and fear coexist? With us discussing love, fear, and illusion is R. James Case. His website, rjamescase.com. So, Jim, we've been talking about how, fear is many things, and a lot of the problem is not the fear itself, but the conditioning we've built up around it and the neurological pathways that we fall into without making choices, just going by what we've done in the past. Um, so now let's look at how these emotions interact. So, a lot of your work is around fear versus love. So can they coexist? And if not, why?
Very basic answer, vibrationally, they're in completely different ends of the spectrum. So we don't live in a vacuum. So we have multiple experiences going on in in the world. We can have love for something in our lives. Say we love our pet, and we're having an experience of fear about said pet, and the fear is really running us. We're anxious. That something's seriously wrong. I got to do something. I don't want my dog to die. All of that is the story that's built around the attachment to the dog. That is not love. There is no love in that experience. There is attachment in that experience. The love is the unconditional space that allows you to see that your animal is suffering, and then you lean into, how can I assist this? Can I offer is there something I can do to ameliorate the suffering that I'm witnessing? And then that love guides your steps. That love guides your experience. It does not mean you may not have that fear jingling around back here. It's still a choice in perspective. It's still a choice of, here I am with this thing. Do I want to transmit this crazy energy to my already anxious and fearful, maybe fearful? I don't know if dogs necessarily experience fear the same way, but whatever experience the animal is having of pain or suffering or whatever, do I want to contribute to that in energy? Like meeting like does not change the experience. So bringing love to that experience means surrendering your attachment so that you can experience fully the love of that being. We get confused because we think the attachment is the important part, and it's the least important part.
So basically, it's like, if you don't want them to get your goat, don't have one.
Okay. That's a way to look at it, yes.
So if we're programmed by fear, it seems like we're pretty much in a fear-based society. Am I off base here with that?
No, I don't think so at all. No.
Okay. If we are indeed programmed by fear, what's the point, and who's using it to manipulate us?
So that gets into an area that I don't have a clear picture of, other than there is this experience that I call the mass consciousness, which is this energy of all of the collective thought energy. And in the context of that thought energy is the things that we kept thinking over and over, and the ways of being that we keep reinforcing. And part of that has to do with the construct of religion. Part of it has to do with the construct of business. Those two main forces, because our enculturation is about who we're going to be and how we're going to show our heart to people, both of which are used to manage and control people. Both are used to manage and to manage people. Over time, if you look through history, it's the same throughout history. We are no different really than what it was like in the Romans, except we have more science stuff surrounding our current reality than they had 2,000 years ago. We assume that. We don't know that for sure. We assume that we are better than. We don't know that. We assume that, in my experience. So, it's an interesting balancing point, because the entrainment happens from the word go, and the education system. We believe that fear is what keeps us in control, and fear keeps us inattentive to who we truly are, which is its miraculous love machine that has the ability to transform itself and anything that it can come in contact with if we allow that to happen.
So if we're in fear, or if we're being manipulated by fear, doesn't that derail that ability out of our hands and into the hands of whoever's controlling us?
Yes, because the fear is already giving up your power. The fear is surrendering your power to the thought, the idea, the belief that you are afraid of, and the attachment to that you are equally afraid of.
So what does it take to let go of attachment? I mean, aren't our attachments so deeply embedded that we don't recognize them for the most part?
Yeah, but that's part of what it is to become a conscious human being. You know, how I define becoming a conscious human being is conducting my life in such a way that I bring the things below the conscious threshold above the conscious threshold. And so I look for those activities like the breath that help me to stimulate that spin of energy up so that I am operating from a different perspective, a different vibrational frequency. And that different vibrational frequency allows me to observe the experiences. I still feel them, I still experience what's happening, but there's a gap between me and that. So I can process it. And then as I use the breath to shift state and I go into that meditation or I go into that quiet space with myself, then I have the ability to see it for what it is and make a different choice. It's now above the conscious threshold. Sometimes with the emotion helps us to recognize that thing that is stuck in our craw, that thing that is holding our energy in place. And when we create distance from it, we can see it in a much greater capacity. And now we see the all of it, meaning we see, oh my gosh, I'm being afraid of X because A, B, C, D, or because, and you start to connect your own dots. You start to see the thread that you pull through your own consciousness that supports that. And again, you've brought it above the conscious threshold to say, this doesn't serve me. What can I do differently? How can I choose differently? What way would I go? And then sometimes that requires somebody who can help you with that. Many times, because you're in that new vibrational space, that connection to the highest self has the greatest amount of wisdom and powerful insight. That if you can be in that quiet space and not be attached to the outcome, you can and will instantly, and I'm telling you this from my personal everyday lived experience, that you will experience that insight and have a new way of viewing how you connect your dots. And as
So
soon as you do that, it changes everything.
it sounds like, it's a work in process. And so in other words, we get a stimulus, we're about to go into a response, and
Yeah.
then we have to do all these things you talked about. Is there enough time? Is there enough of that space to go through that whole process before we act or react?
Sometimes not, but most times, yes. Most times, see, we think that cause and effect, stimulus response is this immediate thing that has to happen. That somebody said something to me, so I have to clap back. I have to step in. Somebody did I have to do this. Instead of recognizing that you're reacting to it, stopping, take a deep breath, ground yourself, be present in the experience. You still may have your nervous system going nuts, but you have a choice in that moment to say, you know what? I'm not in a space to respond to this minute. Give me a minute, or let me come back to this so that I can process this and then come back and respond to it in a way that is not reactive. Now, here I
You've
am
you've
at I'm sorry, go
you've
ahead.
you've spoken a lot about taking that breath. So
Yes.
exactly physiologically, what does that breath do? How does that help?
So see how to describe this unfolding. So the breath for me is life force. It's chi. It's prana. It is the essence of the energy that animates this whole body. Without breath, we are nothing. Without breath, we don't exist. Without breath, you stay on the planet. So the process of breath is about reconnecting to that source of energy that is me. And when I breathe, I am reconnecting. I'm connecting up. I'm saying up because that's we have up and down. So I'm connecting up. It could also be construed as expanding. It can be
So
seen
is
as a
it depend on, we take breaths in and breaths out all the time. So is it depend on your intention, what you're doing with that breath? I'm setting back into myself, I'm connecting up and down, and then from that space, I'm going to make a choice. So it's a different approach to breath, is it not?
it is, and it becomes. I'm very aware of my breath all the time, but I've been doing it for decades. I've been paying attention to my breath for a long time. I was just working with a client yesterday, and we were doing a breath exercise, and it took 3 times before she could actually take a breath deep enough to settle her energy. Meaning she could breathe, she'd follow me, she'd breathe and she'd breathe and she'd breathe, and then she'd pull herself out. And then we'd stop and say, okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to pull this breath. So when you take the breath, I want you to take as much air as you can, as deeply as you can. And then I want you to release all of it, and then do it again, and then again, and then again. And then she would derail again. And then we came back and said, okay, what I observed this time is that it's not grounding. You're not grounding in it. Because what happens when you connect to the breath is that you immediately ground, you immediately become present. And this is different than just sitting where you're just sort of shallow breathing in the chest. This is a full-blooded, full-lunged experience. And I don't mean hard, I mean focused.
Is it diaphragmatic breathing?
No, it is. It can't. Well, no. I guess it incorporates the diaphragm because it's breathing through the whole body. But the idea of, then there's lots of schools of breath. There are a lot of schools out there of how to use breath. The one that for me, what I have developed for me and the process that I use is one that is simply using in through the nose and out through the mouth, in through the nose and out through the mouth. And then I connect with the base of the spine and the top of the spine. So at the base of the coccyx and at the point behind the head, that little place where the spine goes under the occiput there, the mouth of the soul, I believe that's called sometimes. And I use those spots to trigger this movement of energy, this flow of energy up and down the spine. But I'm just simply using breath, and I'm engaging that breath. So when I inhale, my inhale is full and complete. And I exhale. And I want that breath to completely expel. And typically I try to expel more than I take in, because there is part of the breath process that the CO2 is as effective as the oxygen. Go ahead.
So we're just about to go into another station break. But does this start to have permanent effects rather than you having to hyperventilate every time a situation arises over and over and over again?
I wish I had the opportunity to demonstrate this for you, because I can do this breathing at a very rapid pace for a very long time, and I don't get dizzy. I don't lose my stand. I'm able to completely function.
Well,
the dizziness is a function.
It is that magic moment. So please
Yep.
stay with us as Jim and I continue to explore the many faces of fear. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Do you believe fear separates us from ourselves? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with R. James Case. James, let's get into a little bit further about how being in fear separates us from our connection with all that is.
So I see fear as a restricting mechanism. So the flow of love and the flow of that greatest part of ourselves that's coming to us, I believe, all the time. The reason it doesn't always reach us is because we restrict the flow. We cut it off by what we think, what we feel, what we believe. And those belief systems cause the stretching of the rubber band, I like to see. So if alignment is here, the fear then pulls that rubber band and it stretches it to the furthest extent that it can, but it's still attached to the source. It's just outside of this experience. So as we release that fear, the band loosens and we come back into the center. And the choice of breath, I just want to touch just on that last segment real quick. The breathing piece is a very simple process, actually, but the process has so much depth to it that it helps to unravel the layers. Because as you breathe more life into the deepest parts of the tissues and the energy field of your body, those things that can't sustain in the vibration that you're changing to have to change. It's not optional. You can't have lower vibrational stuff stuck in higher vibrational stuff. The two things can't coexist in the same space. So the thing that is no longer able to sustain at that vibration has to come up. It has to vibrate to the surface. And that vibration to the surface is how we then begin to approach each of those steps. So it becomes a very organic process. It's not one that has to be, you don't have to get out and beat the bushes, so to speak. You don't have to be this drive, drive, drive. Simply live your life. Do what you do. Change how you respond to it. Change how you react to it. Change how you engage it, and see how that begins to change what shows up in your life.
So let's look at resistance. What is it, and how does it impact us?
Resistance, one of my favorite words, because it's so insidious. It's everywhere in everything. Resistance is simply put, is anything we do that distances us from our true experience of love, our true experience of ourselves. We use resistance when we think our belief or our idea about ourselves is more true than something that's being reflected to us, or an idea that's being presented to us. And so we use the fear is like, oh, no, this is who I am. That I'm too afraid of. I don't know what to do there, but this is who I am. So the resistance is then holding on to. Resistance can also it comes in every kind of different form. But it for me is a key indicator. It's the first place I go in my life now. If something's feeling off, I stop and say, am I resisting here? Is there resistance? What's the resistance? What is it? What is it I'm feeling? The rub, as it were.
Does resistance tend to be a byproduct of fear?
No. I think it can be, but I think resistance is a stimulated response. Well, let's see if I can put this in order. Resistance occurs when we feel there's something attempting to make us change or make us think something different than what we think is already better for us. The fear comes when the persistence of the thing that wants us to change continues, and we can no longer fight against. We become afraid that I'm not enough now. Wait, my belief is I'm not good enough. My belief is whatever my belief is. And the resistance is an attachment to a viewpoint, while the thing that's trying to be the instrument of change is moving inexorably into your world.
So basically the goat again.
The goat again, yes. That darn goat.
Darn goat. Why do you see faith and trust as foundational?
Faith and trust is foundational because I have to develop the best relationship with myself in order to consistently find that alignment. And so faith and trust is not about faith and trust in some imaginary being somewhere in the world. Faith and trust is about, I am an expression of God. I am that expression of the universe here on this planet, executing my life. It doesn't make me better than anybody because we're all the same. All of us are doing the same thing. It makes us full of who we are. And so, that's sort of how it's not a, again, I lost track of my thought. I hate when that happens.
It was the goat. The goat took it. I was asking you that you see fear and trust as foundational.
Yes. So the fear and trust piece is something that builds. It's definitely cool when it starts. We all have gone through the evolution of it, right? We are introduced to religion as we're young people, and faith and trust becomes a big thing in the religion. Faith and trust in God, faith and trust in God. I translated that a little differently because I've always felt a powerful relationship with this bigger part of myself. I haven't always honored it. I haven't always been the best about it, but I've always felt that connection. And so over time, I started to realize, wait, I'm putting all my faith and trust out there, and the faith and trust belongs here. I need to know that I can trust myself to step into any situation and that I will show up 100%. I can trust myself and have faith that I am going to do the right thing by me. And maybe sometimes I screw it up, but I'm still doing the right thing by me because I'm continuing to step forward. When this oxygen thing happened, there's a huge opportunity to just, withdraw from the world and go, my life, what the heck? I'm strapped to a bottle. I'm on 4 liters of oxygen. That's like most people are on 1 or 2, So there's so many places that fear and lack of faith and trust could completely derail me. But building that continuous focus into that faith and trust says, I love this. I love me. I love my experience. And regardless of what's happening, I'm still good. I'm still a powerful person, and I still continue to create. How am I going to adapt into this? This has
How
become a way for me to become even more present. Thanks, sorry.
So no problem. How can we tell that we're actually processing fear, taking that space in between, making different choices, or just shoving it into denial where it eventually comes up and haunts us? How can you tell the difference?
Uh, to me, it's like night and day. Um, Telling yourself a good story can make you feel good for a few minutes. Telling yourself a good story may even make you feel good for a day or two. But the reality is, you know how you feel. You know what you're experiencing. I honestly don't care how unconscious you are. Feeling bad is feeling bad. And whatever degree of bad is, right? So if you're not feeling wholly who you are, then you're not being truthful with yourself. And that's
But I
undermining
would
the faith
argue
trust.
there are a lot
Mhm.
of people that really don't even know when they're feeling bad. They're so in denial that all's well, as the boat sinks.
True, true.
So how do you step from that place? People are brought up that way. They're
Well, the
taught
first
to be that
step,
way.
the first step in that is willingness. The first step is you have to have a doorway. You have to create a doorway if you don't have one. Um, the biggest thing that I find in my work is if there is not if there is not reception, if there's not a receptive environment, the work goes nowhere because I can't change you. I'm not going to change you. I'm going to create a framework. I'm going to create a space where you have the ability to step into that. But if there is no willingness to go there, there's nothing to have a conversation about. That person is in their process at a different place than somebody else may be, and that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the evolution they've chosen and that they're walking. And I'm
So
here if as I'm sure you are. I'm here if I can be of assistance. I'm there instantly. But if I'm not going to impose that because that's not my role.
we're coming close to the end of the segment, so it's definitely end of the show actually. So it's definitely
Already?
time. You're real close. So it's definitely time for me to ask you, Jim, what is your
Mm.
purpose? What's your mission?
To change people's relationship with fear. To It is the greatest gift in my life that it has nothing to do with never being afraid again. It has to do with understanding that it doesn't run my life, it doesn't run my choices, and it doesn't run what I choose to do in my life. It is a mechanism now that I can use to show me how to better live my life.
So what's your vision for the future? Should we actually start to correct, en masse, correct our relationship to fear?
So many things will change as a result of that. It's hard to fathom in my mind, even as I do in meditation, it's hard to fathom the depth of the change that can happen. Because when it's no longer driven by fear and it's driven by love, every perception we have changes. Even in the context of, you think of all the stuff that's happening in our world right now, there are lots of things that look really ugly and really miserable, and those things are driven by fear. If you eliminate the fear, if you change that to a love environment and everyone starts operating from that place, you're suddenly now experiencing the world in a way that we've never experienced it before. So I
It,
think it's
it's,
an adventure in a way that the adventure of a lifetime, quite honestly.
it seems like from what you're saying, we have things backwards. In other words, we think that the events in the world are causing the fear, when
Right.
indeed the fear might be causing the events in the world.
Ultimately, we create our own reality. I believe that is a basic tenet of my life and any life. We create the reality we experience, and it's there for us to reflect to us how we feel and what we think. That's what it's for.
So
So if
we're
all you see is fear, then guess what? Pay attention.
so we're not trying to abolish fear from what you're saying so much as change our relationship to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. The war against anything is a waste of energy. It's a waste of energy. We're not trying to battle anything. We're trying to find balance. We're trying to find alignment. And so if you put resistance in that process, you won't get there from here. So fighting it is not of any value. Change is the value.
Well, we're just about out of time. So, Jim, please, you, I believe, just published a new book. What's the name of it, and where can people find it?
The book is called Fear is a Choice: Unraveling the Illusion of Our Separation from Love. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Indie Noble. It's on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited. Yeah, please pick it up. It's a great tool, and lots of people have bought it and have really had some powerful impact from it. There's a lot of good reviews up as well.
Well, Jim, thank you for what you're bringing into the world. Unfortunately, we are out of time. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, Gwilda. Greatly appreciate it.
Our guest this hour has been R. James Case, the author of Fear is a Choice, Unraveling the Illusion of Our Separation from Love. His website, rjameschase.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. And please be sure to join us right here next time as this mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.